always believed that my life was destined for a kind of perfection, the sort that shined from the glossy pages of fashion magazines and echoed through the ornate hallways of our Beverly Hills mansion. My name is Ava Lockhart, and if you'd asked anyone in Los Angeles about my father Richard Lockhart, they'd have painted him as a genius, a billionaire whose business empire stretched from New York to Dubai, a philanthropist with a heart as big as his bank account. But the truth? The version I lived every day was far less glamorous. To me, my father was not the benevolent mogul the world saw, but a cold, unpredictable storm, a man who could sweep everything away with a single word. Growing up, my world revolved around shopping trips to Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, jet-setting between Paris and Milan for Fashion Week, and extravagant parties thrown in honor of nothing at all. Our home in Beverly Hills stood as a monument to excess, a 3-story white stucco house with Italian marble floors, a shimmering pool, and acres of manicured gardens where my mother, Sophia, once loved to sit among the roses. But even in that house, my father's love was never unconditional. I had always sensed the tension that hung between us, a tension that grew worse after my mother passed away when I was 15. My father's hatred for my mother was a secret only I seemed to know. To the rest of the world, he mourned her loss. But inside the walls of our mansion, he blamed her for everything that went wrong in his life. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me, as if I were a ghost, her ghost come back to haunt him. Maybe that was why. On the morning of my 21st birthday, everything changed so suddenly, so violently. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because the housekeeper had just placed fresh flowers on the breakfast table, and I was scrolling through my phone, looking at new arrivals from Saks Fifth Avenue. My father entered the kitchen, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He didn't greet me. Instead, he sat across from me, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Ava," he said, his voice as cold as the steel appliances around us, "you look just like her. Every day, you look more and more like Sophia. I can't stand it." I tried to laugh it off, unsure whether he was angry or nostalgic, but the laughter died in my throat. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're cut off, Ava," he spat, his lips curling into a sneer. "I've had enough. The trust fund, your credit cards, all of it, 1 billion rupees. That's what you lose today. Not that it matters. You're not getting a penny more from me. Not now. Not ever." For a moment I thought he was joking. After all, my father had always measured everything in rupees a quirk from the years he spent expanding his business into India. Even though we lived our entire lives in America, I waited for the punchline, but none came. Instead, he shoved a small canvas tote across the table and told me I had 10 minutes to leave. I ran upstairs to my room, my sanctuary, decorated with designer clothes, perfume bottles, and photo frames of happier days, and tried to process what was happening. There was no time to gather anything. The guards outside my door had strict instructions. No luggage, no cars, nothing but what I could carry in my hands. I grabbed my wallet, which had 40 crumpled dollars left from a shopping spree in Santa Monica, my phone, and a single photo of my mother. As I walked out of the house for what I thought would be the last time, I looked back at the towering windows and the blooming rose bushes, wondering how the world could feel so cold even in the California sun. The first few hours were a blur. I wandered aimlessly down Rodeo Drive, my old playground, where I'd spent thousands without blinking. The boutiques that once welcomed me with champagne now looked at me with suspicion. I passed by Prada, Gucci, and Louis Vuitton, pressing my face to the glass. Remembering the rush of buying a new dress, the comfort of knowing I could have anything I wanted, now, all I had was a tote bag, a pair of Louboutin flats already wearing thin, and my pride. Hunger crept in as the afternoon faded. I bought a bagel from a street vendor with my dwindling cash, careful to make it last. I wandered into a coffee shop on Melrose, hoping to use the bathroom, but the barista asked me to leave when I couldn't afford to buy a drink. By nightfall, I realized I had nowhere to go. My phone, disconnected by my father's accountants, was useless. The friends who once called me princess didn't answer my texts, and the ones who did replied with awkward silence or disbelief. It was only as the sun disappeared behind the palm trees that reality truly set in. I was alone, penniless, and without a roof over my head for the first time in my life. There was no driver waiting, no security detail, no soft bed with silk sheets. The only thing I had left was the memory of my mother's gentle voice, telling me to be strong. I spent that first night sitting on a bus bench in West Hollywood, hugging my knees and watching the stars. The city that had once belonged to me felt impossibly vast and indifferent. I didn't cry not that night. I promised myself I wouldn't give my father the satisfaction. But inside, I was drowning. How quickly the world can turn, I thought. From marble halls to city streets, from billion-rupee shopping sprees to counting coins for a bottle of water. I wondered if my father was watching, if he cared, or if he was already moving on to the next project, the next wife, the next reason to forget about his daughter. But even as the night grew colder, something hardened inside. Me, a resolve I didn't know I had. I would survive. I would endure this exile, not because I wanted to prove something to my father, but because I refused to let his hatred destroy me the way it had destroyed my mother. The world had taken everything, but it hadn't taken me. And so, as the first light of dawn crept over Los Angeles, I rose from the bench and started walking, determined to write my own story no matter how impossible that seemed. The early days of my fall from grace were, in truth, the darkest of my life. I had gone from living in a Beverly Hills mansion, from private jets and tailor-made dresses, 2 nights where I barely slept at all, my stomach twisted with hunger and my heart knotted with shame. I found myself on Sunset Boulevard, shivering in the cold morning air, clutching a cardboard sign I'd ripped from a discarded box behind the Louis Vuitton store. The irony never escaped me once. I'd shopped there with reckless abandon, swiping my father's black card for handbags that cost more than a year's rent in half the apartments in Los Angeles. Now I stood outside, my hair greasy and my shoes scuffed, begging strangers for change while they hurried past, their eyes skimming over me as if I were invisible. I remember one night in particular, the kind that changes you forever. A woman swept past in a cloud of Chanel No. 5, her heels clicking on the pavement, her laughter floating into the air like champagne bubbles. I was suddenly stabbed with memory of days when that could have been me, when I'd been the one holding shopping bags, not a battered sign. I almost called out to her, almost pleaded for a moment of recognition, but she was gone before I found the words. It's hard to describe the humiliation that comes with begging. Each dollar felt like a confession that I'd lost everything, that I was at the mercy of the world. I learned quickly which corners were the best, which hours the busiest. I kept to the tourist spots, where people's pockets were loose and their hearts, sometimes, a little softer. I never told anyone my last name, not even when I saw the flicker of suspicion in a stranger's eyes, wondering if I was really just another grifter on the streets. Nights were the worst. The first few, I wandered until I couldn't keep my eyes open, searching for somewhere safe to curl up. Sometimes I'd slip behind a diner in Santa Monica, where the dumpsters reeked but the alley was quiet. I made a pillow of my old Burberry coat, the last remnant of my past life, and watched the stars blink through the haze of the city lights. I often wondered what my mother would have told me. I tried to conjure her voice, gentle, determined, telling me I was stronger than I knew. Sometimes I believed it. Everything changed the night I met Miguel Sanchez. He was the cook at the Santa Monica diner, a stocky man with kind brown eyes and hands scarred from years at the grill. He caught me rifling through the dumpster one night, looking for food. Instead of chasing me away, he handed me a steaming paper cup of chicken noodle soup and a heel of bread. I ate in silence, too hungry for pride. He didn't ask questions, he just nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. That was how our friendship began. He let me sleep in the alley behind the diner, promising the manager he'd keep me out of trouble. In the mornings, I washed my face in the staff bathroom and helped wipe down tables in exchange for a hot meal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was better than begging. And soon the manager took pity on me and gave me a job just a few hours a week, scrubbing tables and washing dishes. I took whatever shifts I could get, working double for every extra dollar. The first time I got paid $120 for a week of hard labor, I held the cash in my hands for a long time, marveling at what it meant to earn money honestly, without my father's shadow hanging over me. Miguel became more than a friend. He was my guide to a new world. He lent me books, mostly paperbacks about business and self-improvement. He told me about his own dreams, how he was saving up to open a taco truck someday. His optimism was contagious. He believed in me when I barely believed in myself. "You're smart, Ava," he told me one night as we split a greasy burger after closing. "You're not meant for this forever. You just need a plan." That idea, having a plan, became my obsession. I started going to thrift stores on my days off, spending hours picking through racks of clothes. I had an eye for fashion, even if my own wardrobe was falling apart. I bought designer blouses and vintage jeans for $3 or $4, then listed them online on resale sites. At first it was slow. Some weeks I made only $40, but I was relentless, photographing every item with care, writing clever descriptions, shipping packages on my lunch break. When I realized how many people were eager to shop luxury for less, I doubled down. Soon I was making $100, then $300 a week in profit. By the end of my first year scraping by, I had saved nearly $20,000. It was a small fortune to me, enough to rent a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Korea. It wasn't much, a cracked window, a mattress on the floor, noisy neighbors, but it was mine. For the first time since my exile, I had a front door that locked and a place to call home. I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more. I began using my last name again, not to get favors, but as leverage. I wrote to every startup in San Francisco I could find, offering to work for free if they would just let me learn. I finally got an offer from a small tech company run by a brilliant woman named Olivia. She had heard of my father, of course, but she cared more about my hunger to succeed. She'll let me intern for her, unpaid at first, but quickly gave me real work helping her analyze fashion trends and design marketing campaigns. Olivia became my mentor. She taught me how to build a business from scratch, how to pitch to investors, how to survive in a world that chewed up young women and spat them out. Inspired by my own journey from luxury to poverty, I started to dream of a new kind of company, a way to make high-end fashion accessible to everyone, not just the rich. That idea became Ava's Closet, an app that connected people looking for designer bargains with those who wanted to sell, blending technology with my lifelong love for fashion. The rest happened fast. Investors loved my story. They loved my drive. They poured money into the company, and I worked night and day to make it a success. By the time I was 25, I was hosting launch parties in New York, shaking hands with venture capitalists on Wall Street, and watching my bank account swell, first to $1 million, then $10 million, and finally to $100 million. I was no longer the beggar outside Louis Vuitton. I was the CEO of my own future. And in every dollar I earned, I found a piece of myself I thought I'd lost forever. For years can reshape a life in ways you'd never imagine. In those years, I had transformed from the lost, humiliated girl scrounging for coins on Sunset Boulevard into a woman who could hold her own in the most exclusive circles of American business and society. My company, Ava's Closet, had gone from a scrappy little resale app to a multi-million-dollar fashion platform. My name, once synonymous with scandal and pity, had become something whispered with respect at industry parties and startup summits in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. Still, despite all I'd achieved, there was one shadow that never quite left me: the ghost of my father, Richard Lockheart, and the ache of everything he had taken away. When the invitation arrived, it was little more than a glossy envelope slipped across the desk during a lunch with a Miami business associate. It promised a night of glamour at the Four Seasons Hotel, an event teeming with Miami's elite, and the kind of connections my company could always use. I didn't even glance at the groom's name. I was so focused on a new supplier partnership, and so busy prepping the launch of Ava's Closet's luxury wedding service, that the details blurred together. All I cared about was the chance to wear the red Givenchy dress I had saved for, a triumph of thrift and strategy, bought at a steep discount for $1,800 in cash after months of watching the price drop. It was bold, almost defiant, and when I zipped it up in my small but elegant Miami apartment, I felt every inch the woman I'd become. Arriving at the Four Seasons, I paused beneath the glittering lights of the grand entrance, taking in the marble floors, the velvet drapes, the staff in crisp uniforms. A valet opened my car door, and I walked into the lobby, head high, heart pounding with that familiar mix of nerves and excitement. The ballroom doors were open, music spilling out. A jazz trio played beneath golden chandeliers, their notes weaving through laughter and the clink of glasses. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and everywhere there were splashes of color, wild orchids in vases, custom napkins printed with elegant gold script, and the gentle hum of a party just beginning. My business partner, Chloe, met me near the entrance, her eyes lighting up at my dress. "You look like you just stepped off a runway, Ava," she whispered. We moved into the crowd, greeting old friends and new allies: boutique owners from New York, influencers from LA, investors I'd met in a half-dozen cities. My phone buzzed with congratulations from clients who had heard about my latest business feature, and for a while, I forgot about everything except the thrill of belonging. And then I saw him. Standing at the front of the room, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was my father. For a moment, I was breathless, frozen in place. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the day he had driven me from our house in Beverly Hills. He looked older, perhaps, but he carried himself with the same arrogant pride, his smile bright as he turned to greet his guests. Beside him stood a young woman with luminous skin and champagne blonde hair, swept into an intricate chignon Caroline. His bride. She couldn't have been much older than I was. And as the crowd settled for the ceremony, I realized, with a dizzy sense of disbelief, that I was at my own father's wedding. My first instinct was to turn around and leave, to vanish before he could see me. But it was too late. Our eyes met across the room, and for a split second, his mouth twisted into a sneer I remembered all too well. He leaned over to his groomsmen, whispered something, and I saw the men smirk and glance my way. The humiliation was instant and sharp, like a slap. I could almost hear his voice. That beggar girl must have crashed the wedding for free food. For a second, I was 17 again, helpless, out of place, unworthy. But then, in the very next moment, something extraordinary happened. Jenna Rivers, the wedding planner, hurried past in her signature cobalt suit, stopping just long enough to flash me a grateful smile. "Thank you, Ava," she mouthed, pressing her hand to her heart. I blinked in surprise, and then I started to notice the details. The custom linens embroidered with a discreet A logo at the corner. The unique floral arrangements featuring rare South American orchids I'd sourced through a new vendor. The musicians, whose contract I'd reviewed only weeks before, as part of a partnership proposal. Even the waitstaff wore little pins in the shape of my company's symbol. In my haste to make business connections and test out our new luxury wedding supply network, I hadn't realized just how much of this event's wedding was built upon the very empire I had created from scratch. As the ceremony began, I stood at the back of the room, a strange mixture of emotions swirling inside me. Old pain, new pride, and a quiet sense of victory. The wedding was a masterpiece of elegance and taste. Every detail executed flawlessly, and so much of it was thanks to Ava's closet. The irony was almost too much to bear. My father, who had cast me out with nothing but a cruel word and a handful of dollars, was now celebrating his grand new life, surrounded by the fruits of my success. Unbeknownst to him, the beggar girl he'd laughed at was in fact the architect of the night's perfection. After the vows, as the newlyweds mingled with guests, I moved quietly through the ballroom. Everywhere I turned, people thanked me or asked for advice about their own events. Even the hotel's events director came over to shake my hand, praising my team's professionalism and the seamless way everything had come together. It was surreal, hearing my name spoken with such warmth in the same breath as my father's. For a moment, I watched my father out of the corner of my eye. He was basking in attention, his new wife by his side, entirely unaware of the web I'd spun around him. It would have been easy to seek revenge, to expose myself and claim a petty victory in front of his friends and business rivals, but I realized I didn't need to. The night was mine in every way that mattered. As I slipped out onto the terrace, the Miami night thick with jasmine and salt, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. For years, I had been running from the shame he'd forced on me, from the ache of being unwanted. But here, in this ballroom lit by my own ambition and grit, I knew I had outgrown him. I was not defined by his rejection, or even by my success, but by the journey that had brought me here. And as the laughter and music floated up into the warm night, I finally understood. I belonged to myself, and I always would. For most of my life, I had imagined what it would be like to stand face to face with my father after all the years apart. Sometimes, in my mind, I would rehearse sharp words or clever retorts, picturing myself as a triumphant figure in his world of power. But now, surrounded by the opulence of his wedding, with my own company's touches woven into every detail, I realized that I didn't need vengeance or spectacle. The very fact that I was here strong, successful, unbroken was its own victory. Still, my father could not resist putting on a show. As the night wore on and champagne flowed, he gathered a small crowd around him in the ballroom, regaling his guests with stories that always put him at the center. I drifted nearby, half listening, chatting with a few industry friends and clients. Then, as if drawn by some old, twisted bond, I heard my name slip into his conversation. "It's amazing how the world works, isn't it?" he boomed, laughter rumbling in his chest. "One day you're on top of the world. The next, you're well. My Ava knows all about that. She used to shop here in Miami, you know. Now, I hear she'll shops for scraps, fallen daughters, wasted fortunes. What can you do?" The group erupted in polite, slightly uncomfortable laughter. I could feel old embarrassment creeping in, the urge to shrink away, to become invisible. But I stood my ground, taking a slow sip of sparkling water, reminding myself that the past could not touch me unless I let it. This was no longer his stage. What happened next surprised us both. Caroline, his new bride, so lovely in her designer gown, so sharp behind her innocent smile, leaned in close to my father. She had been watching me, her eyes bright with curiosity since the moment I arrived. Now, with a gentle hand on his arm, she whispered something in his ear. I watched his smile falter, confusion flickering across his face. He shook his head, and Caroline repeated herself, her voice a little louder. "Richard, that's Ava Lock. She's the CEO of Ava's Closet. Didn't you know?" For a long moment, the world seemed to slow. I saw realization dawn in his eyes, followed quickly by something like disbelief, and then he looked around, noticing the small A logos on the napkins, the compliments pouring in from guests and vendors, the fact that so much of this lavish night had been possible because of my company's reach and reputation. The laughter in his group faded as people glanced at each other, recognizing the shift in the air. My father tried to recover, brushing it off with a forced chuckle. "Well, I always told her to work hard. Maybe she finally listened," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. His friends smiled politely, sensing his discomfort. For the first time in my life, I saw a chink in his armor, a flash of uncertainty in a man who had always believed the world would bend to his will. The rest of the evening unfolded in a series of surreal moments. The band played my favorite jazz standard song. My mother used to hum in the kitchen, prompting a flood of bittersweet memories. Guests I had only just met approached me, offering genuine congratulations for the way Ava's Closet had reimagined luxury weddings. "We'd never have pulled this off without your team," Jenna Rivers gushed, her gratitude unmistakable. Each word of praise chipped away at the wall my father had built between us for so many years. At last, late in the night, my father found me on the terrace, overlooking the glittering Miami skyline. The party thrummed inside, but out here, the air was soft and still. For a long time, we stood in silence, watching the distant lights and listening to the muted strains of laughter and music. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, the bluster gone. "I never thought you'd make anything of yourself," he admitted, not looking at me. "After everything, I thought you'd come crawling back, or disappear. But here you are." I turned to him, searching his face for the man I once called my father. There was envy there, yes, but also something more vulnerable, a grudging respect perhaps, or even regret. "You left me no choice," I replied, my voice steady. "I lost everything that night. You made sure of it, but you gave me something too, a chance to become someone on my own terms. I'm not your shadow anymore. I never was." He let out a sigh, running a hand through his silver hair. "It was never about you, Ava. You remind me so much of your mother. I could never forgive her for leaving me, for making me feel so powerless. I suppose I punished you for it." The confession stung, but I found I could accept it without bitterness. I had lived in his shadow long enough. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said softly, "not because you deserved it, but because I deserved to be free. I built this life because I had to. I built it because I wanted to know who I was without your money or your name." The words came easily, like exhaling after years of holding my breath. We stood together as the first fireworks burst over the city, colors blooming in the sky. Guests crowded to the balcony, marveling at the display gift from Caroline. I later learned, a woman who, in a few brief words, had undone years of silence. I felt Chloe, my loyal business partner, squeeze my shoulder, reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. The applause, the music, the light, it all felt like a new beginning. As the party drew to a close, my father offered a stiff but genuine handshake. "Congratulations, Ava. Truly," he said. There were no more boasts or cruel jokes. He had been humbled, not by my revenge, but by my resilience. In that moment, I realized that the true wealth in my life wasn't measured in dollars or rupees, but in the strength I had earned and the person I had become. Losing everything had taught me the value of a single dollar and the sweetness of every small success. It had taught me how to survive, how to forgive, and most of all how to love myself, even when no one else did. The city alive around me, I felt a joy that money could never buy. I was no longer the girl he abandoned. I was Ava Lockheart, architect of my own fate, living proof that in America, even a billionaire's beggar can rise again, and I was finally, completely free.